This is The Future Of, where experts share their vision of the future and how their work is helping shape it for the better.
I'm David Karsten. Data is the currency of the digital age, and most of us give it away without a second thought. Each time we click "I agree" to privacy policies online, those clicks have consequences. They shape how our personal information is collected, shared, and sometimes even exploited. Today, I was joined by Dr. Adam Andreotta from Curtin University to talk about his book, Rethinking Informed Consent in the Big Data Age. We explored how big data is reshaping our privacy, investigated the failures of online consent today, and looked ahead to how we might build more effective systems for the future. If you'd like to find out more about this work, you can visit the links provided in the show notes. You know, I was sort of thinking as I prepared for this, I thought, well, speaking of personal data, I'm going to have a look at a bit of yours, Adam.
Okay.
I just had a look at your path to where you are today. Well, as much as is revealed online, and I find it very interesting the fact that you completed an undergrad in computer science, which sort of took care of the what and the how, but then did you get to a crossroads and decide to look at the ethics of the how? Could you explain a little bit about your path?
Yeah, so my first degree was in computer science, and as I was doing programming, I got really interested in, say, how this relates to people. So for instance, when you're making a program, you can get it to do exactly what you want via these if-then statements. If this happens, this input, do this kind of thing. And it seemed to me that this is kind of very similar to human psychology. Often we react this way to certain inputs. Think about people are aggressive when people are aggressive to them. And I kind of got thinking about how this relates to, say, free will and determinism. And I thought, hey, are we really free? Maybe we're all just really advanced, sophisticated programs. And they said, that's a little bit too philosophical for the computer science department. Why don't you go down the road there to the philosophy department and ask those sort of questions?
Well, so you go to study your PhD. What was, if you could summarize in a very simple way for us, your thesis?
Well, the thesis was actually, before getting into the whole AI ethics of it, I wanted to really go back and think about how we know things. So it was really on self-knowledge and how we know our own minds. And really from that starting point, then I wanted to go and get some of the other bigger questions about consent and everything like that. But I was almost starting from the, where does Descartes start from? The cogito ergo,
Wow.
So your own kind of thoughts. And I suppose for me, that was kind of like the foundational kind of work that I wanted to do. And then from that, then I felt like that was what I really needed to have a bit of a think about. How do we know our own beliefs? How do we know our own minds? Kind of what is special about human minds? And that seemed to be the question that you had to answer in order to do ethics, in order to do work in the philosophy of mind, work in all these other kinds of fields. It always seemed to go back to self-knowledge. So, how we know things in general, what is more familiar, our own minds kind of thing. So it was all about the epistemology, how we know things. And that was the next step after computer science. And I guess after that, I kind of tried to bring those two together, the technology and the philosophy. That's kind of what I do now.
Well, I think the question of whether or not we are actually just programs sounds like the plot line of The Matrix. Are you Neo?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of interesting science fiction films about that kind of thing, and that was kind of what I was really interested in. I suppose around that time, The Matrix had just come out, and this is in the mid-2000s, so a little bit after that. But I was really interested in those questions, and what if we're just programs? What does that say about our responsibility? Maybe none of us can ever be praised or blamed for different actions we have, kind of thing. And the people in computer science said, look, they're really interesting questions, but just stick to the programming. This is where the syntax goes, learn the language, and there's a lot, sort of not very practical questions. What you should do is try to figure out how the programming works, and then you get hired at this company. But I kind of always had those really interesting questions in the back of my mind that I kept getting distracted by, and eventually those sort of took over. And I find that if you're interested in things, you spend more time wanting to learn them, and then eventually the C++ or the programming became a little bit dry and didn't kind of excite me in the same way. Once I'd sort of seen that there are people that work about those, so it was around that time that I kind of switched a little bit, if you like.
Well, look, I think it's a very worthy distraction and one that, there are lifetimes of work ahead of you, really, in this area. But look, before we go into a deeper exploration of your actual work, as it stands today. Can you just define for us what personal data is? I mean, you talk about informed consent, and that's to do with personal data. Can you define what that is for us?
Yeah, so personal data is really anything that relates to an identifiable or an identified natural person. This is a definition that's taken up by the GDPR. When we're usually talking about
the GDPR,
the General Data Protection Regulation.
Oh, those guys.
Those guys. This is a really impressive new piece of legislation in the last few years from Europe, from the EU countries, and it's really sort of set the pace in terms of data protection. Sort of, it's the leading kind of legislation, that the envy of Australia and I suppose the United States. But when we're talking about that, we're talking about anything that can potentially identify you. So the IP address, your emails, photo of you, likes, browsing data, purchase history, the list goes on and on and on. Really anything that can be tied back to you and reveal something about you. And you can imagine the kind of thing that would come from being on the internet, using a smartphone, anything that kind of contributes to your digital footprint would be part of that.
And let's face it, our footprint in 2025 is massive. As individuals, isn't it? There's just no getting away from it.
Yeah.
Why is that a problem? Why is giving up our data a problem?
Well, it need not necessarily be a problem, but I think many people are becoming increasingly alarmed because of the importance of privacy. So when we want to take a step back and say, why is privacy important? And if we think about why privacy is important, it limits others to have power over us. When we give away our privacy, we open ourselves up to manipulation. We can maybe be harmed. We find privacy is important for trust, for our own autonomy. We don't want to give away too much information. And so think about why privacy is important in general. And then I think you have an answer to the question about why the collection of all this data is becoming so much of a problem. Because every new device you use, every new app you use is collecting information about you. And in the wrong hands or the wrong kind of data can undermine, your human rights or maybe even some of your own desires. You may not just want certain bits of information to get out there. It allows you to control maybe the way that people perceive you. There's certain things you only want your family members to know, or your reputation management. And so when all that information gets out there, we lose a bit of control over that process. That's just going to be different for each and every one of us.
I suppose any individual you'd speak to, Adam, would argue that, well, our data is ours, but there comes a point in terms of when we talk about informed consent or uninformed consent that we almost give up the right to ownership of that data exclusively. Is that the case? And
this is really it's the central point of the book. It's not so much that there's anything wrong with giving away that data, but it's about being in control of the data that's kind of given away. So consent is supposed to be the mechanism by which we give it away. We agree to it or we don't agree with it. And the informed is that we sort of know what's happening with it. But that's just so hard to do nowadays because there's so many different types of information that's being collected about us. And it's almost impossible to kind of get a hold over that and control what's actually happening in that process, which is, I think, alarming to many people.
Well, what are the good things about the sharing of our own personal data with big data?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots. I mean, if you think about, say, in driverless cars, we might think about the data that's required. So it needs a lot of data to be trained upon. That could be personal data, how we drive on the road. Think about advancements in healthcare, lots of data from lots of patients, and maybe eventually AI can get very good at recognizing patterns that a human just wouldn't have the time to do. And that's really beneficial. Even entertainment, Netflix, for instance. You save lots of time by getting all your favorite shows presented to you. That requires personal data. It requires the shows you like. Did you spend the whole time watching it? Did you stop watching after 2 minutes? What other shows have you liked? Did you give it a good thumbs up at the end? All those kinds of things. And from that personal data, it can give you a recommendation about what you might enjoy next. Without personal data, we couldn't do any of that. And I think most people like those kinds of things, right? So there's lots of benefits from having all of that data. We couldn't do it without the data.
And yet, with the benefits for the very same slab of data that you choose to share, there are also flip sides. I mean, let's take DNA and genealogy, for example. You could unwittingly help incriminate a family member.
Yeah, so this is where it gets really tricky, right? Because we might say that, interesting with those cases, 23andMe, and there's been some high-profile cases where police have actually worked out who actually murdered somebody, not by getting the DNA of the individual, but by a related family member. And that seems like a good result. But in those kinds of cases, there are lots of people that didn't consent to giving their information away. You might give it away, and that might actually reveal information about someone very close to you. So suddenly, it's almost like you're consenting on behalf of other family members. And we might say that's okay in cases of, say, crimes that are solved, but it gets into a really gray area because now lots of other people, we can find out information about them, and they haven't even been asked about it. They haven't given their consent. And that kind of seems pretty problematic, even if it can maybe in the end lead to crimes being solved. It's maybe an invasion of other people's privacy, and that gets into a really difficult kind of gray area.
Oh, so grey, Adam. But we talk about informed consent as something that, the onus is on us to give that consent. Yet the mechanisms by which we do this, reading privacy policies, cookie preferences, that responsibility on us as individuals is actually quite a commitment. Some of these documents are massive.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through the current state of privacy self-management?
Well, it's really difficult. The other day I saw a privacy policy that was about 100,000 words or something. So, you can imagine how long it would take to get to that. The reality is that most of us don't read all the privacy policies that were presented, and obviously for some pretty good reasons, right? There are just more and more of them coming about. For every new app you download, you've got a Fitbit, you've got, like, even cars now have terms and conditions associated with the data they collect. Your Tesla might be collecting data about where you've gone to train that autonomous vehicle. But there's more and more devices, more and more privacy policies, and it's simply just impossible to go through that. So the reality is that most of the time, in order to use these applications or services, we just click accept. So what we're doing is giving uninformed consent. And the problem with that is we don't really know what we're giving consent to a lot of the time. And sometimes that's fine, but other times it might be that we're giving consent for our information to be used in ways that don't align with our preferences, our values, and that's the concern, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you put it in those terms, the reality is most of our consent is uninformed. If we're being real,
I think that's right, and that's really the problem. It's just not possible to do it. And given that we do use these applications, we may have to press consent. Or, sometimes you actually give consent just by being on the website or the service. So often we don't even know that we've given consent.
I'm not trying to sound alarmist here, but can you walk us through what some of the potential outcomes could be when we talk about particularly, in the brief it's couched as the transparency problem, which we've kind of touched on here, but also repurposed data. That's a real issue, and it might not manifest for months.
Yeah, exactly. And with repurposed data, I mean, what I do in the book is try to look at the comparisons between medical consent. And so the reason that transparency is so important in the medical field is because you want to know what's going to happen in the actual procedure, right? What are the risks? What are the likelihood of success? What's going to happen in the long term kind of thing. But once the procedure is done, that's sort of it, right? You've had your heart procedure, or you've had your, something to do with your leg or something, and then it's done. But with data, it's really difficult because even after you've given consent for it to be used today, that same data could be used in a different way for another company next week, or in 5 years, or combined with other data in a few more years' time. And it doesn't really become a risk until it is combined with such data. Or in the case of Fitbit, so for instance, Google acquired that at some point, and their privacy policies might have been fine for you and you would have given your data, but then another company comes along, buys the company, and maybe they now have a different privacy policy, which maybe doesn't adhere with your values. So this data can just kind of sit there for a long period of time, and maybe a year or 2 or 3 later on, when the policy changes or other conditions change, suddenly a new risk enters the scene. So it's almost like this. It's almost like you have to give continued consent. And that's a very strange way of giving consent. Usually we give consent for something to occur, but online we have to sort of give consent for who knows how long it's going to be used for. Might other companies want to eventually buy it? New companies come onto the scene all the time and buy existing data for purposes that we can't even imagine. And so it's really difficult to think about the lifespan of the data.
Well, when you think that data is actually the commodity to be chasing now, that is where the real wealth lies. You almost have to look at these privacy policies with a slightly cynical view that your data is there to be, exploited is a really strong word, but yes.
And changed as well. I mean, in the book, I give an example of X, formerly Twitter, that one day decided to add biometric data into its privacy policy. So now exactly how that's going to work, it's not clear, but if you looked at the privacy policy 3 years ago, that's probably not going to still be valid to today. So the privacy policies can change, the types of data that are collected can change, the uses can change, the companies that are interacting with this data can change. Very overwhelming for people that are trying to, even if you could spend a few hours going through the policy, how long is that going to be valid for? When might it change next? Are they being transparent? And in some cases, the answer is no.
Well, I'll look at some of these policies, and Adam, it's one thing to read them and having the time to read them, but how many of us would actually understand it?
Yeah, and the problem is kind of exacerbated by the fact that there's lots of opacity in them as well. So the companies are not often motivated to make them clear. In the book, I give a few examples of some work that's been done on fertility apps, a recent study by an academic from UNSW, and they found that some of the world's leading fertility apps were very misleading in the way that the language was couched and about the opt-out terms, and there were conflicting messages in them. So if you read these things and are confused about them, or you find that there are different messages in different parts, it's really hard to know what's actually going to happen or what's to be expected, and it just leaves you in a very kind of vulnerable position. You don't feel very empowered, I suppose.
Especially with such a major set of decisions that you're about to make. I mean, that's.
And it's one thing to say, my Netflix likes are going to get collected, but there's everything else that we do online now. We spend almost our entire lives online. That it's become, there's so much information that's being collected, and often it's very, very personal in its nature.
Adam, it just seems like an insurmountable obstacle. This issue. This conundrum of being, I guess, a participant in the digital world, whilst retaining some sort of modicum of privacy. Would a genuine option be to actually go completely off grid? I mean, is that even realistic, or is there another way to approach this?
I guess it is one option. One thing to say about that is just how hard it actually is. I mean, even coming to Curtin University, you have to use a parking app a lot of the time to get here, and even the parking app will collect lots of bits of personal information about your number plate, maybe the amount of times where you parked, location that you parked. Question about where that information goes, how well is it stored? Because of course, if it's not well stored, or there are risks of it being hacked or something, then that is, you wouldn't want to store your money in a bank that has known privacy flaws, right? Or vulnerabilities. So we place a lot of trust in these institutions, and how well do we know even the parking app at Curtin? You can take things offline, but often there's this fear of missing out. If you're a business owner on Facebook or something, you have to maybe pay a price for that. A lot of people talk online now through messaging systems if you don't want to be on those. So you can do it, but there's often a price to pay that I think makes people very hesitant to do that rather, just because we do spend so much of our lives online, right?
Well, what do you suggest then, Adam? Like, how do we tread carefully?
Well, it's difficult. So some authors actually suggest that the problem's so bad that we have to sort of give up on this idea of us taking agency. And what really we should be doing is pushing for legislation. But the approach I take in the book is that, no, I think there is a place to do it. It's not something that we can kind of complete all on ourselves. But I think that if companies were encouraged to try to help us through this process, maybe we can talk about some of the different approaches that I suggest too, we might actually have a chance of managing some of our privacy here. Well,
look, firstly, may I ask, Adam, is there ever an option, when you're going through a privacy policy and you need to accept these conditions, can you go back to that provider and say, look, I largely agree, but look, 0.235 and 0.752, I've got an issue with those. I will agree subject to those two being left out.
I can't really think of any. I'm sure there probably are some like that. It's very, very rare. A lot of the time it's a take it or leave it kind of thing. And what I do in the book is try to look for inspiration in the medical field. And one of the things that medical practitioners will say is when we're doing procedures, we got to be transparent, but we also have to offer patients alternatives. You have to say, well, you can do this procedure, it has these risks, or there's this one if you don't want invasive surgery, or you want this one over here. And then the doctor's supposed to have a conversation with you and figure out what's best for you. But with a lot of these online systems, you can either accept it or not. And in a way, some of them are quite coercive in that way, right? Because if you don't use them, then you miss out on all the benefits. And really, users are fairly powerless in terms of negotiating. You might find the odd one where they can, I mean, some of them provide you kind of lists of options you can select, but for the most part, individuals don't have much power with respect to negotiating. I mean, what's like a large company like Spotify going to say? I'm not comfortable with section 4.5. They're going to say, don't use the platform then. There's millions of other people that will do it. And probably because they don't suffer any financial penalties from that, in terms of like lots of people not buying, it's probably not really, they don't probably take much of an interest in it.
Okay, well, in the absence of that as an option, Adam, that's a terrible idea from Big Dave here. But but what can we do?
Well, it has merit. It has merit. Let's say it's a part of a larger set of ideas, yeah. But I think, obviously the law has to play an important role. And I mentioned the GDPR before in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation. And this requires companies to actually get informed consent from people, which I think is a positive sign. And if there is any misleading contracts or those kinds of things, penalties can be issued to companies. So I think that's a really good starting point.
Before you go on, Adam, how does that actually manifest? I mean, if we were to look at a privacy policy in Europe, how would it differ? What would it look like?
A good example is actually from Australia, where Facebook were accused of harvesting profiles to get pictures. And I suppose they were selling them to different people that were interested. In Europe, they weren't allowed to do that. They had to offer opt-out options because the GDPR is set up such that if people want to opt out of things, they have the option to do that. In Australia, since we don't have that legislation, Australians weren't offered that. When they were asked about whether Australians would get it, I don't think Facebook or Meta had much of a comment. So that's like a practical example of how the legislation can actually make a difference. And it doesn't sound like a big deal. It's an opt-out option.
That is actually a big deal though, isn't it, Adam? It's massive. It gives us choice.
Which gives us choice, yeah. So, I mean, you might say it's only a small thing, but I agree. It gives us a lot of choice, and at least it leaves consumers with the capacity to send a message to the company. Because if a large amount of people are opting out, then that could actually send quite a powerful message to companies. The fact that Australians are deprived of that choice because of the legislation points to a need to change that legislation. But of course, legislation can't cover everything. You still want to empower people and make them informed about decisions. And the fact that, imagine if we had to get consent from people and people still had to read millions of words of privacy policies, even if they were adhering to legal norms, that would still be a problem, right? Because you would still have to read all these things.
I interrupted you, and you were on a bullet train of thought just before. What were some of the other, I guess, measures that we can take in a practical sense? Yeah.
Well, one of the ideas, and maybe I can discuss the three central ideas from the book. One of them has to do with ethics review. So if you've ever worked at a university before dealing with, before going out and doing your study involving human participants, whether you're doing a survey or, asking people about how onboarding processes work, you have to do an ethics review, whether you've understood the risks, how you're going to be collected the data, where it's going to be stored, all these kinds of things like this. And a couple of years ago, a few colleagues and myself looked at this idea and thought, what if you could look at this idea and do something similar in the big data kind of space? And so you would have a policy, let's say by Facebook or Spotify or something, and an ethicist or a team of ethicists, just like a team of people look at the university ones, would actually have a look at it and say, this is very misleading. What you put over here confuses the average person. Make it clearer to them. This is a bit legalese, change it over there. And at least that would get rid of some of the deception that is, I guess, rife in a lot of this kind of work. So that would at least make it perhaps achievable to a certain extent. That would be one thing to say. You would hopefully get rid of deception in those kinds of cases. One example from the book I look at involves Meta. Involving a VPN service they had to. And this particular VPN was advertised to consumers as protecting their data. What it was actually doing, yes, it was protecting their data, but from criminals, it wasn't protecting data going to Facebook. And a lot of people signed up for this VPN on the assumption that they wouldn't be giving all their information to Facebook about what sites they used and everything else like that. So that was a little bit, maybe not sneaky, but it was maybe not the kind of thing that if it was given ethics approval, an ethicist might say, or a team of ethicists say, look, this is what people would assume that are using a VPN.
Exactly.
And by, including that, that's maybe not lying, but it's a little bit misleading. And so make sure to put that. And if you look through these privacy policies, there's lots and lots of examples like that where, some okay, you'll find flat out lying, but often the opt-out button's hidden, or it's very difficult to navigate, or, things are very confusing. And I think they're done so deliberately so that people are actually going to continue to go. So I think if you had some sort of oversight or review of that, how exactly that would work is a big question, but you would at least get rid of some of those more nefarious kind of elements.
So pillar 1. Yeah. Get the ethicists involved. Pillar 2 is?
Pillar 2, shorten some of these privacy policies. That's a big problem at the moment. We cannot read them. So some other work that I've done has looked at getting rid of some of the text and replacing them with pictures. And this has been really cool because a couple of examples from WA actually involving Bankwest. They were actually able to change some of their products and replace text with pictures of people using their products. And they found that people were able to actually understand what the products were much easier with a little comic there as well. It's also used in an onboarding program when people are coming to a new business, and lots of other really interesting cases too.
It's far more demonstrative, really.
Far more demonstrative, yeah. In fact, actually used in some countries where literacy levels are quite low, and people can still sign employment contracts by looking at the pictures of what's actually happening. Literacy levels might be high in the Western world, but when it comes to this stuff, we're often not able to understand any of it.
Well, unless you hold a Bachelor of Laws, it's unlikely that you can actually interpret what's been written.
Yeah, so why not replace some of these more difficult things with pictures? And you'll get the word count down. This is new and emerging research, so I guess you got to test it. But it seems like people are much more engaged. It's hard to get engaged with millions of words of privacy policies. And it looks like pictures also help you understand things as well. This is being used in learning in lots of different fields.
For time immemorial.
For time, right?
Really?
The
cave drawings.
Cave drawings, yeah. Or you want to learn science and maths, visual illustrations can be really good. So why not convey some of the really hard concepts with pictures? And that would be one way to get the words down, make sure engagement is up, and then also at least make these things actually understandable. So again, some of this has to be tested. But this would go some way to solving some of those kind of problems. And in the book, I give a couple of examples of these that I sort of came up with myself. But so I think that's promising.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so we've got the ethicists involved. We're shortening these privacy policies and using visual aids, I suppose, as an element of that. What's the third pillar there, Adam?
A third pillar is really interesting new technology that's kind of on the horizon, but hopefully here very soon. And that's this idea of automated consent. The idea is that we would be able to trust agents, AI agents potentially, in the most advanced form, to provide consent on our behalf. So rather than having to go through all of these millions of words of code, we would sort of define our preferences to these AI agents, and we would define them. There would be our AI agents, and they would kind of oversee all this stuff on our behalf. So if we're not comfortable with sharing our IP address or being tracked across websites when we're browsing, then we tell our AI agent that we don't want our Netflix data being sold to somebody else. And insofar as we're allowed to make that decision, which is hopefully the ethicists ensure that these privacy policies have, our decisions or where will be enacted. And this would save us having to go through thousands and thousands of policies. We'd trust it with this AI agent, and hopefully our preferences would be able to be consistently applied to the thousands of different applications, websites, apps that we use. And we could maybe trust the fact that our data would not be taken in ways that is against our values or preferences.
Well, Adam, this sort of dovetails very neatly into, I guess, a landscape that's rapidly changing right now, and we've just talked about how AI can work for us in terms of determining helping us out with our preferences, our privacy policy documents, but AI can equally work against us in terms of harvesting the data that we've already put out there. I mean, how can we? I guess how can we fortify ourselves in terms of our privacy protection with this, I guess, oncoming onslaught?
That is difficult because in order to power these AI agents, they will need personal data, and now we're sort of back to our original kind of problem. So I suppose we don't want to trade one problem for another, but we would have to sort of figure out how to safeguard this and make sure that the data is only collected in a way that aligns with our preferences, make sure that no one else has access to it. If I knew your privacy preferences with an AI agent, that might be very valuable to me as an advertiser, because now I can work out your vulnerabilities. What do you allow? How can I try to seek in on that? So safeguarding it from that would be a big one as well. So we don't want to trade one problem for another. We also need to be careful about error, right? Because, of course, AI cars, as you alluded to before, sometimes crash. What happens if our AI privacy agents actually crash too, in the sense that give permission for data to be shared in ways that don't align with us because they maybe misinferred something, or maybe even we made a mistake when we were specifying it or something. That would be a worry too. As soon as we give away control to something else, we put our trust in the technology. What if the technology kind of goes wrong?
Would you say we're, I guess, even with the measures that you're suggesting, are we still maybe a step or two behind the technology? I mean, it is moving so quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, because of course, every time that we solve one problem, a new one kind of comes about. And what's really difficult, you mentioned the repurposed data problem before. Somebody might be perfectly happy with sharing their ping data. Your mobile phone pings to the tower, and then next week you find out that data has been sold to a company to work out how to track someone, and so suddenly that's a risk that wasn't there yesterday. So new risks come about sometimes overnight. New technology, which we can maybe talk about in just a moment, comes about where some of these methods may just be not effective. So it's a constantly changing space, and some of these solutions might be really good for some of the current problems, but then tomorrow maybe there's a new set of problems, and and advertisers and companies are going to be trying to exploit some of those, right? They're familiar with the laws, familiar with how people protect their data, and they may be able to exploit something else.
Well, look, a really interesting aspect of privacy and ownership of data and ownership of, I guess, creative license is really a big deal at the moment, as AI needs material to learn. And are you watching on with a great deal of interest as this sort of unfolds, Adam, where artists are sort of stepping up and saying, look, we've not given anyone any permission to use my painting or my song or my writing to teach these machines. Exactly.
And just before, as you mentioned, the data has to be used to make these amazing things. ChatGPT, large language models are brilliant, but it's so important to remember that there's training data. Where did they get the training data from? There's actually a lawsuit last year or the year before where a lot of authors were very unhappy about they didn't give consent for a lot of this. And what makes an author's book really good is that the English is typically pretty good, because this is a professional writer. So this is just the sort of thing you want to train your AI model. You don't want to like some blog off Reddit or something where there's probably going to be mistakes and things. You want to get Nobel Prize winners or Man Booker Prize winners, really good works of English language or any other language that is used to train. And this is the stuff you want. But of course, how do you get permission to do all that? What if it's a work of James Joyce or David Hume or authors that have passed away? How do you even start to get permission for all that? What OpenAI looks like they've done is just use them and sort of let's deal with the repercussions sort of later on, which is, from an ethical perspective, it's pretty problematic.
Oh, it's fraud. And because once the genie is out of the bottle, so they say, there is no going back. And where does compensation come from?
But it's even more difficult than that, because a lot of the time, even if the tricky part is to know whether those texts are actually used, because yes, there are lots of famous works, but there's also lots of amateurish works that describe those works. So my blog that I wrote, I didn't, but like say, imagine, on James Joyce or some Dickens or something, that could be actually used to train the AI. So the question is, did the original Dickens work or some other work get used to train it? And there it's really difficult, especially when the companies aren't being transparent about the whole thing. Even blogs you use, social media posts, maybe you put all those together and you can sort of piece together what the book was about, or look at reviews otherwise. And these authors were suggesting that our books were used, but of course the companies can say, oh no, your book wasn't used. And maybe they're wrong, maybe they're right. But in some ways, you don't even need those books because you have everything else that other people have written.
Yeah, but have those secondary sources.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really hard to know even how to do this. And I guess that's why OpenAI have just done it. and then they'll thought, let's just deal with it later because it's so. But this, I think, is very typical of the scene. Yeah, in most companies will just act. They'll do that, move fast and break things, and then they deal with the legal fees or the legal problems a little bit after. There's almost like a sense of negligence, right?
Oh, big time.
So that's also really problematic about this, which is why the law, which can take a long time to come in, even if they win their lawsuit against OpenAI, think about how many years that will take. The damage is kind of already done.
I myself have sort of encountered a very interesting scenario within our space here in podcasting and voiceover recording, where voices can be sampled and then subsequent voiceovers can be recorded just using that sample as a basis.
Yeah.
But there are companies that offer something called ethical AI, where the voiceover artist has actually recorded a foundation from which to sample, but then every voiceover recording that is made subsequent to that, they receive a portion of that income, of that revenue. So an arrangement was made up front as soon as this technology arrived, and to me that goes some way toward finding a balance in a way, in terms of embracing the technology, but also acknowledging the originator of the voice, right? It can be done if some thought is put into it.
Yeah, I think what that example shows really nicely is that it's not bad in and of itself. There's lots of really good uses for it. And what we really want is the appropriate uses for it, the ethical use. Are people consulted about it? Is there consent given? Like the examples like that are, I think, really positive. And it just shows that I think the solution to this is to really think about how the different stakeholders are affected. And it's the operating in the background without, again, that's why I think consent here is such an important issue. Things are done without consent. The example that you gave is a case involving someone that gave explicit consent and they were consulted about the matter because there's something very important to them, their work, right? Which is why I think, for me, a lot of these issues really come back to consent.
Future technologies. You wanted to talk about that. You've got something to say. Tell us about what's in store for us and what I guess we are all going to have to contend with and what you're foreseeing.
Well, I think, some of this stuff you could, people could object by saying, look, it's just personal information. Who really wants my, browsing data or IP address? But some of these new technologies, and maybe I'll just talk about one, the emotional AI. This is AI technology that's built upon biometric data. So it looks at your face and it uses technical AI to figure out what emotion you're currently undergoing. And what's really challenging about this is that technology can be used, let's say, when you walk into a store.
Oh my gosh.
So it can sort of work out, you're walking in front of the store, you maybe look at a TV and you look engaged, however that might be defined. And if you look engaged, well, maybe you might give more attention to you, or maybe the shop person doesn't have to waste as much time with you because you look disgusted and you're that sort of person. Now, what's tricky about that is you're just walking into a store. Where is the consent actually given for that kind of stuff? When you're online, you can have all these fancy solutions that I've suggested, your AI agent, all that kind of stuff. But when you're out in the wild, if you like, video footage can be taken. It can be coagulated with other data. And so the more of this that happens, I think we really have to focus on what's actually being collected, because as soon as emotional AI starts to come into things, I think the chance of manipulation gets far greater. And this isn't ethically looked at, then it can be, pretty bad.
It's so nebulous. And is this particular area where you'll be throwing your focus and attention toward over the next few years?
I hope so. I think it's a really interesting kind of space. It's funny that some of these, a lot of these companies you can watch their videos on YouTube of the companies and how they're doing it. They're very open about what they can do. Everything from giving students nudges when they're watching a screen online. It looks at their biometric data if they're not paying attention. And they say it's really good to have in cars because if you're sort of falling asleep, they can nudge you or something. So they're sort of advertising all the benefits, which we talked about before. But I suppose there's a role to describe the risks there, because a lot of the time it's really hard to see those risks. So I suppose the more we talk about those risks, the more it becomes important about, the consent that's actually given. Because when the risks are high, that's fine if you're willing to take on those risks, but you have to be aware of the risks to give proper informed consent. If you're not aware that operation has a 98% chance of killing you, then that's a pretty bit. You can't give informed consent unless you know that.
Dr. Adam Andreotta, what a massive topic to try and cover in a few short minutes. And we really appreciate you coming in today. And we very much look forward to, I guess, how your work will take shape over the next few years, and hope that there'll be an opportunity in the future for you to come back and talk to us about how things have progressed since today's chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to talk to you.
You've been listening to The Future Of, a podcast powered by Curtin University. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it. And don't forget to subscribe to The Future Of on your favourite podcast app. Bye for now.